Hi, Dr. Shruti Poulsen. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome to our interview. Thank you so much for your time. As you know, this
Absolutely.
is for International Journal of Systemic Therapy, the YouTube channel, and we are so excited to have you
Thank you
here.
so much. I appreciate being asked.
Of course. So, for the start, could you please tell us a bit about yourself and your background in the CFT field?
Yeah. So it's hard to believe, but I have been in the field since 94 when I graduated with my master's. And went into community mental health, working with families and things like that, and then went into my doctoral work in late 98. And so it's, been
Mm.
a pretty long journey since my master's. And then, I've taught adjunct. I taught adjunct quite a bit after my master's, and on and off, during my PhD and after it and whatnot. But I've always been, in the field in one manner or another. My clinical practice was full time after my master's, and my teaching was part time. And then it flip flopped after my PhD. I went to full time academic work and part time clinical work, and so other than that short stitch, sort of 4.5, 5-ish years of community mental health, working with families and whatnot, the rest of my clinical work has been in private practice. Usually as part of a larger group practice. It's very small. I mean, right now, even now, I probably don't have more than, I think at its biggest, it was probably, 10 clients or so a week or whatnot. But right now it's pretty small, five and fewer. So life is busy. But yeah, so as I said, I've been in this field for 3 decades now. And I hadn't really thought of myself as kind of a contributor to the field, I guess. But then I look at my work and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I have been around for a little while. And so, most of my academic scholarly work has focused on multicultural issues, cultural responsiveness, and both in the clinical realm and teaching and supervision and on all of those kinds of things. I've done some additional training, but never gone sort of fully certified. So I've, went through all of the EFT training, including the supervision and everything, but didn't really pursue the certification or anything further after that. I've done the Gottman, I think level 1. I've done the IBCT training, so I've gotten a lot of training in like couples therapy over the years, because I do enjoy couple therapy. Of the types of clinical work that I do, I definitely enjoy couple therapy the most. As I tell my students, I sometimes just get bored working with individuals. It's just not enough going on. I mean, there is, but it's like you can only do so much when the
Yeah.
rest of the system isn't there. So I've always really enjoyed couple therapy, but haven't really. I probably, if there's any model that I lean towards, it probably is more of the experiential
Mhm.
EFT kinds of ways of working. But I've come to appreciate Gottman. I definitely was not overly fond of the cognitive behavioral aspects, but the more I learned about Gottman, I think the more kind of appreciated the things that method, especially
Yeah.
the research. I think the research has so much to offer, really, to our work with couples. So I mean, that's, I guess, I don't know if you want any additional stuff from my sort of personal context or social location or any of that kind of stuff.
No worries. I have follow-up questions for you always, always.
Okay,
But
all right.
thank you for sharing that. So much experience, and we're so lucky to have you in the field. And I am lucky that I can call you a colleague. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm like you. I'm also in love with couples therapy. I sometimes tell my students how some other therapies, it's really hard for them when they work with couples. And for me, it's that hard when I work with individuals because it's
Yeah,
just you don't have the system there, right? You like
yeah.
what about that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. If I may ask, what brought you into the field of couple and family therapy?
I kind of accidentally in some ways. I was a Montessori teacher for a few years. I'd done my Montessori training when I was pregnant with my first child. And then when we moved to Illinois, I started working full time as a Montessori teacher. And I think when we started doing like parent teacher conferences and things like that, it just sort of occurred, and I was still working on my undergraduate degree at the time. I'm one of those people that, took the very circuitous scenic route to completing my undergraduate, having gotten married and had children and all that stuff along the way. But anyway, I was doing my undergraduate degree part-time in a program called Child, Family, and Community Services. And then I was working full-time as a Montessori teacher, and just in, working with parents and things like that, it just sort of hit me, I guess, that there's only, I can't counsel these people. I didn't have any training, and that's not the place to be counseling them or, doing therapy with them for sure. But it just sort of occurred to me that I just see these kids, X number of hours a day. And then there's this whole other system that they live with, that I only get to see,
Mhm.
for a few minutes for a conference, a couple times a year or whatever else. And so that's when it sort of occurred to me that that was I didn't know I didn't even know that there was such a thing as marriage and family therapy. But so I ended up finishing, my degree, my undergraduate degree, and going straight into the master's in the same program because we didn't have a marriage and family therapy program. But I was fortunate enough to have a faculty member who ended up mentoring me, Carol Moy, and she was an approved supervisor, and she was one of the main MFT faculty in that child, family, and community services program. And she kind of took me under her wing and, introduced me to AMFT. It got really involved in kind of not mentoring, but, working with students to understand AMFT and myself understanding it. I didn't, and by the way, this is all back before there was any licensing. There was no
Oh,
licensing when I was doing any of this stuff. So really, our main way of entering into the clinical field was to become a clinical member. At that time, it was still a clinical membership for AMFT. And so Dr. Moy really helped me understand that whole process and kind of guided me. And so it was sort of and then with my master's, there were a couple of the faculty that also helped me with independent studies and things like that. And I kind of cobbled together an MFT
mhm,
focus
mhm.
degree, but my master's is in child, family, and community services. So it's, kind of this progression of understanding more what that was. And I
Yeah.
guess, when I got to my master's and started taking theories courses, which is really funny because I love the theories courses and I love teaching them. I love talking theories. But as a master's student, I was just like, oh, this is painful. I don't understand anything. However, what it did open up for me is this realization that, oh, this is the way I think.
Hmm.
This is the way I view the world. This whole idea of larger systems and context and stuff.
Mhm.
So it was very, it resonated for me. And I just didn't have the language for it.
Mhm.
And so that's what my master's helped introduce me to the language of systems and of these models and stuff. And then I think into the PhD that just helped me hone and deepen that knowledge and that understanding and love for those theories as well. So it's, just been this journey, but I would say probably just started with being a Montessori teacher and being around kids and parents and, families and listening to those couples talk. It's just like, yeah, I'm not a counselor, but I think you need a counselor.
That is a very interesting journey. Thank you for sharing that. And no wonder why you are an amazing mentor today. It seems like you had some amazing mentor along the way
I
who
did.
maybe inspire you in some ways. Um,
Yeah,
but that was interesting for me to hear about. So thank you. I know that because of all your amazing experiences, you can talk about all the different aspects, teaching, clinical work, and you can share your wisdom in all those areas. But in this short time that we have together, maybe we can focus more on the research parts since this is for
sure.
the journal. So if you can please talk about your current research or maybe your background in research and what drew you to these specific topics or areas.
Sure, sure. Well, a lot of what drew me to the topics, especially around multiculturalism and
Mhm.
cross-cultural responsibility, is my own social location. I was born in India. I'm an immigrant. I left India when I was 5 years old, when my parents went to United Kingdom, and so then we moved to the U.S. when I was in my mid-teens and whatnot. So it's just, I will always think of myself as an immigrant, as sort of an outsider, if you will, and so issues related to immigration, the experience of immigration, the impact that has on families, really does come from just my own experiences, I think, personally. And then similarly, I would say as a person of color, You know, I mean, honestly, I did not realize I was a brown person until I moved to the US. You know, I lived in all these countries where, as a child, as a young teen, that, yes, I know there were people of other backgrounds and colors, but I didn't realize it was a thing until moving to the US, and sort of, you know, recognizing that first further, but then, you know, also starting to pay more attention, I think, to that. And it's not like we didn't experience things, reactions. My dad is, we're from a Sikh family.
Mhm.
And so my dad wears a turban, and so he's very distinctive. You know, you can't miss, my family, at least the men in the family. They, you know, have long hair and wear turbans and things like that. And so it wasn't as if we didn't experience reactions and things like that. But moving to the United States really sort of, gel that experience of, oh, yes, we're different, and what does that mean to us as a family? And so those kinds of personal experiences, I think, have a lot to do with why I've chosen what I have. The other personal experience, and now actually professional, because it seems like, because people, potential clients, know this about me through my bio or whatever else, but I've been, you know, getting more and more interracial couples. I think they, you know, see that in
Mhm.
my work and whatnot, but I am a partner in, an interracial relationship. My husband is European American, white, and we just celebrated our 40th anniversary. So
Congratulations.
thanks. And so I think, that also generated, a lot of interest. Again, my own experiences, our experiences in that type of relationship and what that means in the US specifically. And so for my master's, we actually had to do a thesis. I don't think we had an option for a project or anything. We had to do a thesis, even though my master's was not a like heavily, research oriented kind of a program. But and so I chose to do a master's thesis on, I wanted to I wanted to interview, and explore, you know, issues related to interracial couples with actual couples, but, you know, the limitations, time limitations, finishing a degree and all that stuff. I ended up interviewing, therapists who had worked with interracial couples, and to kind of get a sense of their experiences, what had, you know, seemed to work, et cetera, those kinds of things. And so that kind of launched the, basis for a lot of the stuff I did.
Mhm.
Well, certainly for the stuff I did for my dissertation, and then even up till now, you know, still writing on topics, related to interracial couples. I mean, I'd love to write a book someday, but sometimes I kind of go, well, there's just too many books out there. I really don't think I have anything new to say. So, but, you know, that's just always been, of an interest, because it started my master's, and then, you know, into my dissertation, and then continuing to write with individually, solo authorship, and also working with, you know, folks. I'm working with a couple of folks in our program, currently, you know, on those topics around interracial couples. And then again, with colleagues, have continued to work, on topics related to immigration, to that whole experience of, being, you know, South Asian in this particular context. So I've, you know, collaborated with folks around, those. In fact, Dr. Natrajan Tyagi, that you know, she introduced me to an organization in Southern California that we've been
Mhm.
doing a research project, with them since I started at Alliant, actually. And that's been around kind of South Asian communities' experiences of bias and sort of, you know, discrimination and things like that. And so we're continuing to gather data. My master's was qualitative. My, dissertation was also qualitative, and that is what I lean towards. I am not very, well, you know, I mean, I say this, but if I actually think about it, yes, I could apply myself and do fine mathematically and statistically, but it's just not where my
Artist.
passion lies. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm much more of a storyteller and story listener. And so it's like numbers just don't do it for me. And so that's, you know, mostly where my, research, and currently as well, has been in the qualitative realm. Trying to think what other topics currently. When I was at, my previous institution before coming over to Alliant, I was working with a lot of colleagues around, supervision and training kinds of issues too, which I kind of started to feel like that was the place to focus my energies. You know, to kind of think about models and how, you know, how do they apply across different cultures? I was particularly interested in EFT and still am. I mean, I think there's a bit more work being done now and sort of looking at the cross-cultural applications of
Mhm,
something like EFT,
mhm,
but really struggled with well, even Gottman, you know, it's like there wasn't not, a lot of stuff wasn't sort of overtly even addressed. And so it just
mhm.
felt like, can we talk a bit more about, well, what parts of these models may not apply so much? Yes, everyone has emotions and has emotional experiences. I agree, but how they get expressed and how that, you know, that process
Yeah.
of connection or even, you know, what's a secure figure or haven. I mean, that can vary greatly, you know, I've
Mhm.
experienced that in my own cultural context. And so those were the kinds of things that were sparking my interest at that point, and still are. Right now, though, I'm kind of in survival mode, just trying to keep up with the projects that I've committed to. So it's like, yeah, what am I doing? But I have several chapters sort of in the works, you know, around these various topics.
I think I understand you a little bit. So, so yeah, you are very busy. And I agree with you. Like whenever I hear the sentence that whatever is universal, I a little bit struggle with that, and it's challenging for me to digest that. So I understand what you're saying. And before I forget, I just want to say that I think that you have a lot to offer in your future book. So please write that book. I know that you're so busy. Please find some time. I think with everything that we do, it may come up to choosing between sleep and writing a book.
Yes, true enough, true enough.
But it's amazing. And from what I've heard, your research is aligned with your clinical work, which is great. So, with your experience in your clinical work and also the research in the past maybe 3 decades, do you see any emerging trends in maybe in the CFT field in general, but that's a very general question in the multiculturalism that you are working with, or even like couples from different backgrounds? Do you see any difference or any emerging topics in that?
Well, I mean, I would say one area that I have tended to focus on is the accessibility, or how do people from different cultures, or whether or not they access, you
Mm-hmm.
know, therapy to begin with. And I have seen that shift, I would say. You know, like I said, I see more and more interracial couples. I definitely have started to see more South Asian clients,
Mm-hmm.
even though I'm not, you know, necessarily geographically in an area that would necessarily have that many that much of a population. But those are the kind of shifts I've seen, is maybe because therapy just maybe across the board has become more visible and acceptable. So I'm seeing a lot less stigma. It also could be that as you know, further generations of, let's say, Indians who are
Mm-hmm.
now growing up in this country, or born in this country, have been raised in this cultural context, and they understand things like, you know, therapy. It's less of a taboo, I think. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm seeing in clinical work for sure. And then, you know, some of it is, I think it's just longevity, right? If you've been around the field long enough, people start to, you know, see what you've been doing. And so you tend to get those kinds of clients. And then I would say, you know, what might be referred to as quote unquote non-traditional
Mm-hmm.
couples. I certainly have had seen an increase in that in my practice, even though I wouldn't necessarily consider myself expert per se over, say, let's say same-sex relationships, but I certainly can work with folks, you know, relationally on a lot of different, but I've seen, you know, more of uh, those clients as well. In private practice, I would say it's not that it's like run-of-the-mill kinds of things, but you know, sort of people come in with the more typical things, right? If you will. But what I have seen over the decades is that even in private practice, the acuity has gone up, I would say, in clients. The number of clients, and again, my sample is so small, right? I have such a small practice. But if I even look at my colleagues' clients and whatnot, the more serious, maybe mental health kinds of issues, either in one or both partners or in individual clients, I've seen more of that in the private
Mm-hmm.
practice setting than, you know, back in community mental health. Yes, that was kind of a given, right? So a little bit more high needs kinds of situations and presenting problems and whatnot. And so again, I don't know that I know exactly the reasons for that per se. But you know, it used to be this thing that, not that I went into private practice, but I didn't want to deal with
Yeah,
problem clients or something like that. But there are limitations in private practice. You
yeah.
don't have the whole setup to deal with crises and things like that. And so it would limit to some degree, right, the kinds of areas of concern that people would come in with. But that seems to have shifted. Whoops. Oh, hold on. I did not put my phone on silent.
That's okay.
Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, so I guess those are a few of the things that come to mind. I might think of some more, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that maybe that's a topic for another day, but sometimes they talk about like mental health crisis versus when I think about it, I don't know if it's mental health crisis or if it's like a normal reaction to other sort of crisis that we have.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and
and
that maybe that's what the big shift is, right? I
yeah,
mean, not that we didn't live in a troubled world
yeah,
before, but it just seems like there's a heightened
yes,
sense of stress and honestly, I mean, and not to blame everything on the pandemic, but I sure feel like life is much more hectic. Weirdly enough, it's like we had this, grinding to a halt for a couple of years, and then when it started up again, it just seems to have ramped up even more so. And I hear other people talk about it, and I wonder if my clients experience the same kind of thing.
yeah,
Like going back to normal life just like took on a whole, and that may have exacerbated, I think, people's, needs. Yeah, I think we're highly stressed, highly
yes.
anxious populace.
Only if they invited us to the White House to talk about this. So I'm just joking. But
True enough. Yes.
so I'm thinking about the different experiences or the different projects that you had in all these years and the different research studies you had. So what was one of the findings or significant findings that you had that if they were like interesting to you? I know that sometimes what we do becomes normal for us, and also sometimes we
Yeah.
experience imposter syndromes. But if you don't want to be humble and you want to brag about your research, what was something that was interesting to you?
Well, I think, initially, with the interracial relationships work, and I think the newer research around has probably also demonstrated this too. But I think what was interesting to me was, and sorry, I will complete the sentence and thought, but the other thing that was interesting about this is that it really sort of mirrored my own experience personally. So I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe there's something to this. That what I found interesting about interracial couples is that they would articulate that they want to be seen as any other couple, you know. Um, and yet there was very much a clear articulation that they also realized and wanted to be seen as unique. And that kind of struck me because I just remember that in my own therapy experience with my husband, that the couple therapy experiences I've had, yes, we went in with what you would call, again, run-of-the-mill couple issues, life transitions, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, the therapists who never asked us anything about our,
Yeah.
cultural, racial differences, I was like, wait, I mean, yes, we're like any other couple with these issues, but at the same time, there's some really significant things. And of course, I mean, I would bring them up, but we would bring them up. But yeah, so that was like, oh, okay, this actually really is a thing.
Yeah.
That and it really, I mean, I still speak about it when I write about interracial couples. I'm just like, yeah, it really was something that stood out, and it doesn't seem like a big aha or anything, but it was for me anyway.
Well, it is interesting. I think, borrowing from narrative therapy, I think our stories are unique, and at the same time, our stories like connect us. Like we have shared
Yeah.
needs and shared experiences. And sometimes for us, it's just at the beginning, it's just a paradox, right? And at the same time, it's not like
Yeah,
both of them are possible. So that's interesting that
exactly.
you found that in research. That's very
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, the other one, probably related to immigration and its impact on families again, sort of validated both personally and professionally, that, yeah, immigration is stressful no matter what,
Mhm.
no matter how it's done or what that it is just, well, I mean, obviously some types of processes are definitely much more stressful and traumatic than others, but it's stressful.
Yes.
It's a stress on the family. It's a stress on the system and on the individual in the system. And that also was like, okay, again, not just my imagination, just because of my own family scenario, but that, yeah. And so I feel like as a clinician, having that information and also kind of validation about it is that when I'm working with people like that, I feel like I can, I very much genuinely, authentically can say, yes, there's a reason why you're feeling the
Mm.
way you are. It's legit, this isn't just you. So that's been helpful, I think. So those are probably the two, main ones I would think. Yeah.
Yeah, those are interesting because we all know that common sense is not science trust, right? So even if something that we have intuition about or something, when we see that in the research, I think that's very interesting. And I agree with you about the immigration. I did a little bit of study, some projects about immigration and stuff like that. And one thing that was interesting to me is like a lot of time in the literature, there's again like this universal experience for immigration for everyone. And in the literature, actually, it says like women they experience more stress than men. But what from in one of my studies that I did, I realized that it really depends on where you're coming from, right? So
Yes.
if you're coming from a country like Iran, I'm from Iran, that like women they have less power than men.
Mm-hmm.
Significantly, when they immigrate to a country like the US, they see, oh, the world can be like this as well, right? So actually they experience stress less than men. So it really depends on the destination and the country that you're coming from.
Yeah.
Sometimes that is missed from the literature when you read about that. So that was interesting to me.
Yeah, context matters a lot. One of my favorite papers that me and Dr. Natarajan Tyagi and another colleague of ours
Mhm.
from Purdue, who tragically she passed away at age 50. She was a dear friend of both of ours, but we did a narrative, basically self-narrative of our immigration experiences, and what I love about that paper is that we all three come from India, but each of us came to the United States at different points in our lives, different stages, developmentally. We came at different historical times for our countries of origin, plus the US. I mean, so it was in writing that paper and having their narratives, my narrative, really be able to sort of speak to that notion of that context matters so much, that all of these things that you identify with or what you experience just have such an impact on how this process is even experienced. So it's one of my favorite articles.
Couldn't
I wish
agree
it
more.
wasn't so old.
I'm, I'm going to read that paper. It's going. It seems very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So I guess like towards the end of our conversation, I'm curious to know your perspective because some of our audience will be what they call like junior scholars or even like graduate students who want to do research studies, who want to publish. But if you remember from the old days, sometimes it can be scary, right? When you are in the beginning
Yeah.
of a journey, right? I remember myself as a graduate student. I was like, it is not possible that I see my names in print. It's just not possible. English is my second language. I don't know, right? It was so scary. So
Yeah.
I have a lot of empathy for students or people in the beginning of that journey. What's your piece of advice for them if you want to guide them or share some wisdom with them about studying a research study, designing a research study, getting published in journals? What do you tell them?
Um, huh. Um, gosh, that's weirdly hard. I mean, I I think I would tell them take the risk. It's
Mhm.
worth it. And so I'm putting it this way because I'm just thinking about my first presentation. I mean, I not even finished my master's, right? And my thesis chair encouraged me to put in a proposal to present at the Illinois Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. I'd never been to a professional conference ever. And I went by myself. I put together a proposal. It got accepted, and it was on my master's thesis on interracial couples. And I presented. It was awful. I thought it was awful, but I didn't know a soul at this place. I didn't know any of these people at that time, but I mean, if I hadn't done that, if I had like that sort of kick-started the thing, like to face the fear and who wants to be speaking publicly, I don't know. So I think that's what I would say is when these opportunities present themselves, you know find someone who's on your side.
Yes.
because that's what helped me with that and with publications, even taking up teaching. I always
Mhm.
knew I wanted to be, teaching in higher ed. My dad's a retired academic mechanical engineering. He doesn't know what I do. I don't know what he does. So, but so I was around teaching and academia pretty much all of my growing up years. But short of that, when you are with people that have been doing this and they
Mhm.
open these doors for you and say, hey, you want to work with me, or hey, you should do this. Yes, you gotta just you gotta just fight that fear
Yeah.
and do it, is what I would say. Because it's scary. I agree with you.
It's a scary,
Yeah.
right? I agree with you. And what I would add to what you just mentioned is I think that discipline is really important. I sometimes tell my students that you just need to sit down and write. Like you need to block whatever works for
Yeah.
you, 45 minutes, 5 hours, whatever. But you need to sit down and write, because if you have one paragraph on paper or
Yeah.
in your computer, it's much better than like having 5 pages in your mind, because we don't see what is in your mind.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then it takes discipline, and also like you can start with like small steps, maybe I don't know,
Yeah.
do a book or something, and then go to research studies. And then yeah, as you mentioned, take a risk. Like the worst case scenario is that they reject you, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's very
Yeah.
normal. It
Well,
happens.
and even if it was so awful, I mean, like I said, I remember that presentation. I was like, yeah, this was not good. But it was like I learned from that
Exactly.
how to do a better presentation. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. So yeah, if only we listen to each other, right?
that's right.
But thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom with us. Is there any last word or last piece of advice that you want to share with us?
I don't know about advice. I would just say, love the field. I mean, love what what we're in, because I mean, I never went into it, being a therapist because I thought I was going to save the world or whatever else. It was just a very simple, love and interest in people's lives. I always say I'm a very nosy person. It helps to be nosy. It helps to be curious. It helps to be, interested in other people's stories. So I think just loving those aspects of it, I can't think of a better field to be in. I mean, with all the disciplines in mental health, I'm just like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is home. I mean, this is,
Mhm.
identity and home, and that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Make it a home.
I feel the same way. I feel like, yeah, exactly as you mentioned, even like with other disciplines or fields in the mental health field, I would choose this field again and again. And also
Yeah.
medical family therapy in parentheses.
Yeah.
But
But
yeah,
that's what's so amazing
yeah,
about family therapy, that it
yeah,
can,
exactly.
work within so many different systems. So,
Exactly. It's a privilege for me to be here. So
oh,
also it's a serious privilege to be here and having this conversation with you. So thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it. Looking forward to more conversations with you.
well, thank you so much, Efren, and I appreciated your questions, and it was lovely to chat.
Thank you.